Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into a beer from Silver City Brewery. I did get this from Tavour, and I'm pretty sure I've only ever done one of their beers prior. This is a brand new one. Though much like the last one, it is a large bottle, big beer. So today we are jumping in for the second time in relatively recent, reviews, jumping into a Scotch ale. This specific one from Silver City Brewery is called Fat Woody. Silver City is based in Bremerton, Washington, and this specific beer clocks in at 9.2% ABV, and it is oak aged. Not spirit aged, just oak aged. So, label art on this one. It reminds me a lot of their last label that I had. This kind of has a crimson tartan vibe. It's got a lion on there, some gold foil. Very nice, clean design on the label. A very, very big beer here. So let's get this cracked. Yep, right up. And we're going to get it poured right in our nice all-purpose glass. This works great for everything. Okay. And this is pouring a bit more along the line of the color that I would typically expect to see in a Scotch ale. The last one we reviewed was absolutely pitch black. This is a lot closer to the hue of a brown ale, which is much more typical for a Scotch ale, though they can be all over the board. They can be a lot lighter, they can be a lot darker, but this is sitting in that I expect to see that color zone. So holding this up, yeah, it's a very deep ambery brown. Holding it up to my bright LED set lights here, I can see very fine effervescence, carbonation moving up, very fine champagne-like quality, which clearly contributed to this very tight, thick, creamy head. Let's get right up over this one for a full sniff. Oh yeah, that head is doing its job. The aromas are really coming off of this. This smells like classic Scotch ale. There's a lot of commonalities between the aroma on a Scotch ale and a barley wine. We talked about that in our last Scotch ale review. This one is no different, and it really is much more of a malt bill thing. So tons of caramel, tons of toffee, and there is a little suggestion of apricots and figs, only a slight suggestion of raisin. So yeah, you'll hear me use these exact same descriptors when talking about barley wines because they do share a lot of common ground when we're talking these big beers with these big malt bills. So yeah, it smells absolutely fantastic. It looks the part. Head has settled down a bit, but it's still holding true, nice, creamy, thick pad on top. Let's just jump right in and see what this one's about. Oh yeah. Oh, that's a big, big beer. Very fine Scotch ale. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about is the body and the related mouthfeel. This is 9.2% ABV. It is not a light or small beer, and indeed, it's got presence to it. Though I would say that the body is maybe not quite as weighty as I would expect. This is kind of between that medium heavy border. At 9.2% ABV, I would expect it to be a bit higher, but it's above average. The mouthfeel, on the other hand, it feels really, really nice. Scotch ales can kind of be all over the board. This is one that has a good bit of resistance to it that matches the expectation for the ABV range, but it doesn't feel super carbonation active on the palate like you would find in a lot of porters. This one indeed is actually quite smooth, very silky, very velvety when you agitate around the palate. And it's got a very, very nice texture to it. Now, if we turn our attention to the flavor profile, the first thing that I noticed immediately is that this oak aging is very apparent in this beer. And I've mentioned this in several reviews. Oak is one of those woods that if you're not using a spirit barrel, you're just using a specific wood to impart characteristics, is one of the better ones that you could choose unless you're picking like some aromatic wood like cedar or I don't know why you would do that, but that's a thing I've had in a beer or two. But oak is a really, really good one. It does impart a very distinct woody character to the beer. So the name, while it may sound like they're being suggestive, calling it Fat Woody, it's 9.2, it's a high ABV, so you could call it fat, and woody because they oak aged it, and it does indeed impart this very nice woody character. Now I gotta say, I did not pick up any aromas of the oak on the nose, but it's very, very clear when you jump into the flavor profile of the beer. It's very nice, and that is a great wood choice and a great barrel choice to pair with the natural complexities and tendencies in the flavor profile of a Scotch ale. This one is leaning very heavily into the big kind of malt-centric side. They didn't overtly hop it. There's not big in-your-face pungent bitters. Yes, there are some, but this is a beer done more in the traditional Scotch ale style, where it is much more about the malt bill, and that's quite readily apparent as soon as you jump into it. So there was a ton of layer of complexity. I wanted to hit the oak first. Of course, there's a lot that shares commonality in the flavor profile that we discovered from the aroma, but I'm going to jump back in anyway, get a second sip, let everything re-intensify. We'll pick out the specifics. We'll talk about the balance and the finish. On first sip, a very, very fine Scotch ale. Take two. Yeah, yet again, the body, not quite as weighty as you'd expect, but the mouthfeel kind of helps counterbalance it. Immediately when you swallow, you get several aspects right up front. Caramel, toffee, raisins, wood. That's the big three. Caramel, toffee, raisins, and wood. But as it kind of dissipates from that initial intensity, you start getting a lot of other undercurrents and subtleties in this flavor profile that you don't get up front. On the back end, once we hit about the 5-second mark and the intensity kind of dials back and is kind of holding stably, I'm starting to pick out notes of apricot. It's very, very nice. It pairs well with the other flavors in here. There was a little bit of a raisin-like flavor, but there's actually underlying grape. And yes, I know raisins are dried grapes, but the two do taste distinctly different. It's got this almost juicy quality from a grape as well as the richer kind of candied quality that a raisin has. So there is indeed a lot happening in this beer, and it's leaning very heavily into these bigger, bolder, more pungent kind of almost dried fruit-like qualities, as well as the underlying caramel. The toffee is there, but it really hits on the front side and dissipates pretty quickly. Then once you kind of get that baseline around the 5-10 second and it's holding that intensity, it does turn much more into caramel. There's no real buttery sense to it. This one feels kind of dessert-like, and I kind of expected that for what it is in this ABV range. So this is a big, slow-sipping beer, no question about it. It's got a lot of the classic traits you would expect to see, both in terms of aroma and the flavor profile in a Scotch ale, and I gotta say, my initial impression is very, very good. In terms of the balance, a beer like this, since they did oak age it, we're really kind of comparing what they did hop-wise, malt bill-wise, and barrel-wise. And since the barrel is not discernible on the nose, not the end of the world. You can pick it up in some lighter beers a lot more prevalently, just due to the intensity of the malts that are in here in a beer this big. But it does come through very clearly in the flavor profile, but it's not making any of the other elements kind of have to fight for their life to get your attention. Hey, I'm in here too. It's extremely well balanced. Whatever malts that they used really worked well. Whatever oak barrel they did pick, however long they left it in there, I think they nailed it. Really, really fine balance on this beer. Now, if we want to turn our attention to the finish, a Scotch ale is not a beer style that you would expect to have a typically very long finish. It's not one like that. This being a higher ABV version of a Scotch ale, yeah, it's a bit more intense, so the intensity of the flavors does last a bit longer than average, but it's not over the top. So above average, yes, but not in the 10 territory, I can say that. But from what I just experienced here, I gotta say it's a very nice, very well done Scotch ale. Very much a classic Scotch ale. We just get this added bonus of that oak aging that does come through very, very clearly. A fine, fine beer. I'm going to take my time, sip on this one, count my scores. When we come back, we will get this beer ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. This was Silver City Brewery's Fat Woody, an oak-aged Scotch ale, clocking in at 9.2% ABV, Silver City Brewery is based in Bremerton, Washington. So this beer did very, very well across all categories. There's only 3 where I did not give it a perfect score, so we will jump straight to those 3 categories in question. The first was the aroma. The aroma was very, very nice, though it being oak-aged, I would have liked to be able to discern it. And yes, caveat, asterisk, whatever you want to do, on a beer that's this big, with this big malt-centric underpinning, it is difficult and challenging to pick that off on the nose, but I would have liked to at least be able to smell some semblance of the barrel. I only docked 1 point here. The aroma does get a 9 out of 10. The next category is the body. So this is a pretty high ABV, 9.2% ABV. This was one of those that kind of was in the border region between medium heavy. A Scotch ale in this ABV range I would expect to be fully, solidly medium heavy. Still above average, just not what I expected for top marks. The body, I gave it 7 out of 10. The next category that did not get a perfect score was the mouthfeel. The mouthfeel on this one, it did have a good bit of resistance, and yes, it was quite lush when you moved it around, but kind of like the body, it wasn't quite as thick and resistant as I anticipated. One nice thing about it, though, is very classic for the style, which doesn't always happen, but it did have the prototypical non-effervescent. So it didn't feel like a porter moving around the mouth. You could really feel kind of what was happening with the body and with the mouthfeel as you were moving around the palate and swallowing. And I misspoke. I said there were 3 categories that did not get a perfect score. There was one final category that did not get a perfect score, and that was the example of the style. And I was kind of torn on my rating for this one. It did get a 10 in most of the categories, but if I take the other 3 categories plus this one aside, it did lose enough points that I think it would be tough to say that this is a perfect example of a Scotch ale. It didn't miss it by much, and really I'm being nitpicky here, but I kind of needed to explain exactly what I experienced with this beer. So I did dock 1 point as an example of the style, but it did get a 9 out of 10. Make no mistake, well above average, which does bring the total score on Silver City Brewery's Fat Woody to a 93 out of 100. So yeah, 4 categories didn't get a perfect 10, and hullabaloo and all, still well above average, guys. It didn't lose that many points, and where it did lose them, really not that big of a deal, but I have to objectively rate it how I experienced the beer. But nonetheless, I absolutely loved it. I thought this was a fantastic Scotch ale, and really an oak barrel aging is a really good choice for this beer. Yes, I wished I could have picked some of it out in the aroma, but it came through loud and clear in the flavor profile, and it was absolutely fantastic. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live, just turn on your notifications, hit that bell icon. It is right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.